If loving yourself means disappointing people who benefited from your silence, then let them be disappointed. Buddhism teaches that peace is not found in being understood by everyone, but in finally understanding yourself without fear or guilt. The moment you stop explaining your boundaries, stop begging for emotional fairness, and stop waiting for others to change, something inside you begins to heal quietly. This is not about becoming cold or distant from the world, but about ending the inner war that drains your spirit. Walking away in silence is not weakness, it is the wisdom of choosing peace over endless suffering. When you love yourself deeply, silence becomes your strength, and freedom becomes your natural state. 1. Loving yourself begins when you stop begging for understanding. One of the deepest and most exhausting wounds in the human heart is the constant need to be understood by people who are not truly listening. You explain yourself again and again, carefully choosing your words, hoping that if you say it differently this time, they will finally see your intentions. You justify your emotions, you defend your boundaries, and you replay conversations in your mind long after they are over. Deep inside, you are not asking for advice or solutions. You are simply asking to be seen and respected. Buddhism teaches that this endless explaining is a form of suffering created by attachment. You become attached to the idea that someone must understand you for you to feel at peace. But when a person has already decided to misunderstand you, no amount of clarity will ever be enough. They are not confused, they are closed. The more you speak to such people, the more you drain your own energy. Each explanation costs emotional strength. Each attempt to be understood pulls you further away from your own center. Over time, you begin to feel small, tired, and unseen, not because you lack value, but because you are offering your truth to someone who has no intention of receiving it. Buddhism reminds us that wisdom is knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. Silence in this case is not weakness or defeat. Silence is awareness. It is the moment you realize that your peace is more valuable than winning an argument or proving your point. Loving yourself begins the moment you stop chasing validation from people who cannot give it to you. You understand that your truth does not need approval to exist. When you stop begging to be understood, you reclaim your dignity. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's limited perception. You allow others to remain exactly where they are in their thinking, without trying to pull them toward your level of awareness. This is not arrogance, this is acceptance. This quiet withdrawal does not come from anger or bitterness. It comes from self-respect. You no longer feel the need to explain your pain to someone who dismisses it. You no longer waste your breath on conversations that leave you feeling empty. Instead, you turn inward and protect your inner peace. Buddhism teaches that true strength is calm, not loud. When you choose silence over endless explanations, you are choosing yourself. You are honoring your energy, your emotions, and your worth. And in that silence, you begin to heal. 2. Walking away in silence is an act of strength, not weakness. Many people stay in painful situations far longer than they should because they believe that walking away means giving up. They fear that silence will be seen as weakness, that leaving without explanation will make them look wrong, or that standing their ground quietly will be misunderstood as defeat. Buddhism teaches the opposite. True strength does not come from confrontation, loud reactions, or proving a point. True strength comes from knowing when something is harming your inner peace and having the courage to step away without creating more suffering. When you continue to stay where you are disrespected, ignored, or emotionally drained, you slowly abandon yourself. You tolerate words that hurt you, behaviors that confuse you, and patterns that exhaust you, all because you hope things will change if you try harder. But Buddhism reminds us that clinging to people or situations that repeatedly harm us is a form of attachment that creates suffering. Walking away is not an act of anger, it is an act of clarity. It is the moment you recognize that your well-being matters just as much as anyone else's feelings. Silence, in this context, is deeply powerful. When you walk away silently, you are no longer feeding the cycle of arguments, explanations, and emotional tug-of-war. You are choosing not to participate in what disturbs your mind. You do not shout, you do not threaten, you do not seek revenge. You simply remove yourself. This quiet decision protects your energy and prevents further harm. Buddhism teaches that peace is not found by controlling others, but by mastering your own responses. Walking away without noise also shows deep self-awareness. You understand that not everyone deserves access to your thoughts, emotions, and time. You realize that some people are unable or unwilling to meet you with respect, and instead of trying to force understanding, you accept reality as it is. This acceptance does not make you cold, it makes you free. You stop carrying the emotional burden of fixing what is not yours to fix. Loving yourself means recognizing when your presence is being taken for granted. It means understanding that staying silent and leaving can sometimes communicate more than words ever could. Your absence becomes the boundary, your silence becomes the message, and most importantly, your inner peace becomes the priority. Buddhism teaches that letting go is not loss. Letting go is liberation. When you walk away in silence, you are not losing anyone. You are finding yourself. 3. Self-love deepens when you stop seeking validation from others. One of the most subtle but powerful sources of suffering is the constant desire to be validated by other people. You want your feelings to be acknowledged, your efforts to be appreciated, and your worth to be confirmed by the way others treat you. Without realizing it, you begin to measure your value through their reactions. When they approve of you, you feel calm. When they ignore you, criticize you, or pull away, your heart becomes restless and heavy. Buddhism teaches that this dependence on external validation keeps the mind unstable, because anything that comes from others is temporary and beyond your control. When your sense of worth is placed in someone else's hands, you give them silent power over your emotional state. Their words can lift you or break you. Their attention can soothe you or starve you. This creates an inner fear of rejection and a constant need to prove yourself. Over time, this need becomes exhausting. You begin to overgive, over-explain, and overextend yourself just to feel accepted. Buddhism reminds us that craving approval is a form of attachment, and attachment always leads to suffering. No matter how much validation you receive, it will never feel like enough if you do not already feel whole within yourself. Self-love begins to deepen the moment you turn inward instead of outward for confirmation. You start to recognize that your worth does not increase when someone praises you, and it does not decrease when someone misunderstands you. Your value is not something that can be given or taken away by others. It exists simply because you exist. When you truly understand this, rejection loses its sharp edge. Criticism no longer shakes your foundation. You listen calmly, take what is useful, and release what is not without emotional struggle. Buddhism teaches that inner peace arises when the mind becomes self-sustaining. You stop chasing reassurance. You stop needing people to constantly reflect your goodness back to you. Instead, you learn to sit quietly with yourself, trusting your intentions and honoring your efforts even when no one else sees them. This inner approval creates a deep sense of stability. You no longer feel compelled to explain your worth or defend your choices. Silence becomes natural, not forced, because you are no longer seeking permission to be who you are. As self-love grows, your relationships begin to change. You no longer attach yourself to people who only value you when it is convenient for them. You become comfortable with being alone rather than surrounded by those who drain you. This is not loneliness, this is alignment. Buddhism teaches that when you stop depending on others to complete you, you meet them from a place of wholeness instead of need. And from that wholeness, you walk away easily from anything that disturbs your peace, without anger, without drama, and without regret. 4. Detachment is not coldness, it is emotional freedom. One of the greatest misunderstandings about Buddhism is the idea that detachment means becoming cold, distant, or emotionally empty. In reality, detachment is not about shutting down your heart. It is about freeing your heart from unnecessary suffering. Detachment does not mean you stop caring, it means you stop clinging. It means you no longer hold on to people, situations, or expectations that continuously hurt you while hoping they will magically change. Buddhism teaches that clinging is the root of suffering because we attach our happiness to things that are impermanent and outside our control. When you are attached, you expect people to behave a certain way. You expect them to understand your pain, respect your boundaries, return your loyalty, and value you in the same way you value them. When these expectations are not met, disappointment arises. That disappointment slowly turns into resentment, sadness, and emotional exhaustion. You begin questioning yourself. You wonder why you are never enough, why people do not treat you the way you deserve, and why your kindness feels invisible. Buddhism reminds us that the problem is not your kindness. The problem is attachment to outcomes you cannot control. Detachment is the moment you open your eyes and see people as they truly are, not as who you wish they would be. You stop making excuses for their behavior. You stop romanticizing their potential. You stop believing that if you just try harder, love more, or stay quieter, things will improve. Detachment brings clarity, and clarity brings peace. You understand that some people are incapable of giving what you need, not because you are unworthy, but because they are limited by their own awareness, wounds, and fears. This realization does not make you bitter, it makes you free. You no longer take things personally. When someone ignores you, disrespects you, or walks away, you do not chase them or blame yourself. You understand that their actions reflect their inner state, not your value. Detachment allows you to step back emotionally while still remaining kind. You stop reacting from pain and start responding from wisdom. Sometimes, the wisest response is silence. Sometimes, the healthiest response is distance. Buddhism teaches that emotional freedom comes when you release the need to control how others treat you. You focus instead on how you treat yourself. You choose peace over chaos, balance over attachment, and awareness over emotional dependency. Detachment helps you stop reliving the same hurtful patterns. You no longer stay in conversations that drain you. You no longer invest energy in people who repeatedly cross your boundaries. You stop hoping for apologies that will never come and closure that others are not capable of giving. Walking away in silence becomes natural at this stage, not because you are angry, but because you are awake. You understand that explaining your pain to someone who lacks empathy will only deepen your wounds. You understand that staying emotionally attached to someone who disrespects you will only keep you stuck. Detachment gives you the strength to let go without hatred and to move forward without regret. You leave quietly because you have nothing to prove and nothing to fight for anymore. True detachment also deepens your compassion. When you are no longer emotionally entangled, you can see others clearly. You recognize that their behavior comes from their own suffering, conditioning, and ignorance. This understanding softens your heart without reopening old wounds. You wish them well, but you no longer allow them access to your inner world. Buddhism teaches that this balance is the highest form of wisdom. You love without attachment, you care without self-sacrifice. You remain open without being vulnerable to harm. In this way, detachment becomes an act of self-love. It teaches you how to stay whole in a world where not everyone is conscious of their actions. It protects your energy, your peace, and your emotional well-being. When you practice detachment, you stop losing yourself in other people's expectations. You return to yourself. And in that return, you find a deep, steady calm that no one can take away. 5. Silence protects your energy more than any argument ever could. There is a moment in life when you realize that not every battle is worth fighting, and not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. Many people believe that if they just explain themselves one more time, argue their point more clearly, or defend their intentions more strongly, peace will finally come. But Buddhism teaches a different truth. Every argument consumes energy, and energy is life itself. When you constantly engage in conflict, especially with people who do not seek understanding, you slowly exhaust your inner resources. Silence, on the other hand, preserves what arguments destroy. When you argue, you reopen emotional wounds. You replay painful moments. You relive disrespect. You allow others to pull you back into confusion and frustration. Even when you believe you are standing up for yourself, constant confrontation can keep you trapped in the very pain you are trying to escape. Buddhism teaches mindful awareness of where our energy flows. Wherever attention goes, energy follows. If your attention is always focused on defending yourself, explaining your worth, or correcting others, your energy remains tied to them. Silence cuts that invisible cord. Silence does not mean you agree. It does not mean you accept injustice or disrespect. It means you choose not to sacrifice your peace for people who are not ready to meet you with awareness. When you stop responding to provocation, you remove fuel from the fire. You no longer give emotionally reactive people the satisfaction of controlling your mood. Buddhism teaches that freedom begins when external events lose their power over your inner state. Silence is one of the strongest tools for achieving that freedom. Protecting your energy is an act of deep self-love. Your emotional strength is limited, and wasting it on endless explanations leaves little space for healing, growth, and clarity. When you remain silent, you give yourself room to breathe. You allow your nervous system to settle. You give your mind the rest it needs to regain balance. Over time, this quiet protection rebuilds your sense of self. You become calmer, clearer, and less reactive. You start responding thoughtfully instead of reacting emotionally. Silence also reveals truth. When you stop arguing, people show their real intentions. Some will respect your boundaries, others will grow louder, more manipulative, or more dismissive. Buddhism teaches that observation without reaction is a powerful form of wisdom. In silence, you see who values you and who only values control. You learn who deserves access to your life and who does not. This awareness helps you make decisions without confusion or guilt. Walking away quietly is often the highest form of energy protection. You no longer explain why something hurts you. You no longer ask for basic respect. You accept that some people are not capable of meeting you where you are emotionally or spiritually. Instead of forcing connection, you choose distance. This distance is not punishment, it is preservation. Buddhism teaches that inner peace is not something you find outside, it is something you guard within. As silence becomes your practice, you begin to feel lighter. Your mind is no longer cluttered with arguments you wish you had won or words you wish you had said. Your heart is no longer heavy with unresolved conflict. You carry yourself with quiet confidence, knowing that you do not need to prove your worth to anyone. Silence becomes your shield, your boundary, and your strength. And in that silence, your energy slowly returns to you, whole and undisturbed. 6. Loving yourself means accepting that some people must lose access to you. One of the most painful but necessary realizations on the path of self-love is understanding that not everyone who enters your life is meant to stay. Many people struggle with this truth because they confuse love with attachment and loyalty with self-sacrifice. Buddhism teaches impermanence as a fundamental law of life. Everything changes, people change, relationships change. When you resist this truth, you suffer. When you accept it, you begin to heal. Loving yourself means having the courage to accept that some people must lose access to you, not because you are cruel, but because you are conscious. For a long time, you may tolerate behavior that hurts you because you remember how things used to be. You hold on to memories, shared struggles, emotional bonds, and promises that once felt real. You tell yourself that walking away would be heartless, that cutting access would make you a bad person, or that patience will eventually fix everything. Buddhism reminds us that clinging to the past is one of the strongest sources of suffering. The person you are holding on to may no longer exist, or they may exist in a way that continuously wounds you. Loving yourself means honoring the present reality, not the illusion of what once was. Some people drain you not because they are evil, but because they are unconscious of their impact. They cross boundaries repeatedly. They dismiss your feelings. They bring chaos, confusion, and emotional instability into your life. Each time you allow them access, you reopen wounds that are trying to heal. Buddhism teaches that compassion does not mean unlimited access. You can wish someone well and still choose distance. You can understand their pain without allowing it to become yours. Allowing harmful behavior in the name of kindness is not compassion, it is self-neglect. Accepting that someone must lose access to you often brings guilt. You may feel selfish for choosing peace. You may worry about how they will react, what they will say, or how they will portray you to others. Buddhism teaches that attachment to others' opinions is another chain that binds the mind. You are not responsible for how people interpret your boundaries. You are responsible for protecting your inner balance. When you prioritize your mental and emotional well-being, you are not abandoning others. You are returning to yourself. Losing access does not always mean dramatic endings or confrontations. Often, it happens quietly. You stop reaching out. You stop over-explaining. You stop making space for disrespect. You allow distance to form naturally. This silence is not passive aggression. It is clarity in action. Buddhism teaches that wise action is calm, measured, and free of hatred. Walking away silently allows you to leave without creating new karma, without adding bitterness to your heart, and without feeding conflict. As you grow, you begin to understand that access to your life is a privilege, not a right. Not everyone deserves to hear your thoughts, know your struggles, or share your energy. This understanding does not harden you, it refines you. You become more selective, not out of fear, but out of self-respect. You learn to invest your time and emotions where there is mutual care, honesty, and awareness. Buddhism teaches that right relationships support your path. Relationships that pull you away from peace are not meant to be maintained at all costs. Letting people lose access can feel lonely at first. Silence can feel heavy. But Buddhism reminds us that loneliness born from self-respect is far healthier than connection rooted in self-betrayal. In the quiet space left behind, you begin to hear yourself again. Your intuition becomes clearer, your emotions become steadier. You no longer feel the constant tension of pleasing, fixing, or enduring. You begin to feel whole. Over time, you realize that removing access was not a loss. It was a return to your values, your boundaries, and your inner calm. Loving yourself means choosing environments that nourish you, conversations that respect you, and relationships that allow you to breathe. When someone can no longer meet you with basic awareness and respect, letting them go is not rejection, it is alignment. Buddhism teaches that freedom arises when we stop holding on to what harms us. When you accept that some people must lose access to you, you step into emotional maturity. You stop confusing endurance with strength and suffering with loyalty. You learn that true love begins with how you treat yourself. And from that place of self-love, you move forward quietly, peacefully, and unburdened, knowing that protecting your inner world is not selfish, but necessary. 7. When you truly love yourself, silence becomes your natural way of living. There is a quiet transformation that happens when self-love is no longer an idea you are trying to practice, but a truth you are living from. At this stage, silence does not feel forced or intentional. It becomes natural. You no longer stay quiet to avoid conflict, and you no longer speak to seek validation. Your words slow down because your mind is no longer restless. Buddhism teaches that inner stillness always expresses itself outwardly. When the heart is settled, the need to explain, defend, or react disappears on its own. When you truly love yourself, you stop explaining your boundaries to people who repeatedly cross them. You stop justifying your choices to those who have already judged you. You understand that explanations are only useful when there is mutual respect and openness. Without that, words lose their purpose. Buddhism reminds us that silence can communicate clarity more powerfully than long conversations ever could. It signals that you are no longer available for confusion, drama, or emotional exhaustion. At this level of self-love, you become deeply aware of how precious your energy is. You no longer feel the urge to react to every comment, criticism, or misunderstanding. You observe without absorbing. You listen without internalizing. This is not emotional numbness. It is emotional mastery. Buddhism teaches that reacting automatically keeps the mind enslaved, while responding consciously creates freedom. Often, the most conscious response is no response at all. Silence also changes the way you experience conflict. Instead of feeling triggered, you feel curious. Instead of feeling attacked, you feel grounded. You see people acting from their conditioning, fears, and unresolved pain. This awareness dissolves the need to fight back. You realize that engaging would only pull you into suffering that is not yours to carry. Walking away quietly becomes an act of compassion, both for yourself and for them, because you are no longer adding fuel to their inner turmoil. As silence becomes your natural state, your relationships begin to shift. Some people drift away because they can no longer provoke you or control your emotions. Others step closer because they sense your calm and stability. Buddhism teaches that when your inner world changes, your outer world must follow. You no longer chase connection, you attract alignment. People who value depth, respect, and awareness naturally find their way to you, while those who thrive on chaos slowly fall away. This stage of self-love also brings deep emotional safety. You no longer fear being misunderstood, abandoned, or rejected, because your sense of belonging is no longer dependent on others. You belong to yourself. Buddhism teaches that the greatest refuge is not found in people or possessions, but in awareness itself. When you rest in that awareness, silence feels like home. It is no longer empty, it is full of clarity, peace, and presence. You also become gentler with yourself. You stop replaying conversations in your mind. You stop questioning whether you said the right thing or handled a situation perfectly. You trust your intentions. You trust your growth. Silence gives you space to reflect without judgment and to learn without self-criticism. This inner kindness strengthens your self-love even further, creating a cycle of peace that deepens with time. Living in silence does not mean withdrawing from the world. It means engaging with it wisely. You still speak when words are needed. You still express love, truth, and compassion. But you no longer waste your voice on those who are not ready to listen. Buddhism teaches right speech, which includes knowing when not to speak. In this wisdom, your words gain weight and your silence gains meaning. In the end, loving yourself fully means becoming unshakable, not because life stops challenging you, but because your center remains steady no matter what happens around you. Silence becomes your strength, not as a defense, but as a reflection of inner peace. You walk through life calmly, choosing understanding over reaction, awareness over attachment, and peace over noise. And in that quiet way of living, you discover that self-love was never something you needed to search for. It was something you needed to return to. 8. Self-love is the courage to stand alone without feeling lonely. One of the final and most profound lessons on the path of loving yourself is learning how to stand alone without feeling abandoned, incomplete, or afraid. Many people confuse being alone with being lonely, but Buddhism teaches a very different truth. Loneliness comes from disconnection with yourself, not from the absence of people. When you do not know how to sit with your own thoughts, emotions, and silence, you seek constant company to escape yourself. But when self-love matures, solitude stops feeling heavy. It becomes spacious, calming, and deeply nourishing. For a long time, you may have stayed in relationships, friendships, or environments that no longer served you simply because you feared being alone. You tolerated emotional neglect, disrespect, or confusion because familiar pain felt safer than the unknown quiet of solitude. Buddhism teaches that fear of being alone is rooted in attachment. You attach your sense of safety and identity to others, believing that without them you will lose yourself. In reality, it is often within unhealthy attachments that you lose yourself the most. Self-love grows when you realize that being alone does not mean being unsupported by life. It means you are no longer distracting yourself from your inner world. When you choose solitude consciously, you begin to hear your own thoughts clearly. You feel your emotions without interruption. You notice what truly brings you peace and what quietly drains you. This awareness is impossible when your life is filled with constant noise, opinions, and emotional demands from others. Buddhism teaches that wisdom arises in stillness, not in chaos. Standing alone also means no longer needing to be chosen to feel worthy. You stop measuring your value by how many people stay, text back, or include you. You understand that people come and go according to their own karma, timing, and level of awareness. Their departure does not mean you failed. Often, it means you outgrew the space they were meant to occupy in your life. Loving yourself means trusting that what leaves is making room for what aligns more deeply with who you are becoming. At this stage, you no longer rush to fill silence with distractions. You do not jump into new connections just to avoid emptiness. You allow yourself to be alone long enough to become whole. Buddhism teaches that wholeness is not found through accumulation, but through understanding. In solitude, you learn that you are capable of soothing yourself, supporting yourself, and guiding yourself through difficulty. This realization builds an unshakable inner confidence. You stop fearing abandonment because you know you will never abandon yourself again. Solitude also teaches you emotional independence. You stop leaning on others to regulate your emotions. When sadness arises, you sit with it gently instead of seeking immediate escape. When joy appears, you savor it without needing an audience. This emotional self-sufficiency does not isolate you, it liberates you. You are no longer desperate for connection, which allows future relationships to be chosen freely rather than out of need. Buddhism teaches that relationships rooted in need create suffering, while relationships rooted in wholeness create harmony. As self-love deepens, you begin to enjoy your own presence. You become your own safe place, Silence feels comforting instead of threatening. You may still desire connection, but you no longer cling to it. You understand that connection is most beautiful when it complements your life, not when it becomes your lifeline. This shift changes everything. You stop tolerating less than you deserve. You stop overgiving to earn love. You stop settling for emotional crumbs. Standing alone with peace also brings clarity about who truly belongs in your life. When you are comfortable in solitude, you can sense when someone adds value to your inner calm and when they disturb it. You choose connection with intention, not fear. Buddhism teaches that right companionship supports your awakening, while wrong companionship deepens your confusion. Loving yourself means choosing environments and people that reflect the peace you have cultivated within. In the end, self-love is not about isolating yourself from the world. It is about no longer being afraid of yourself. When you can sit alone without anxiety, without restlessness, and without self-judgment, you have reached a powerful level of inner freedom. You walk through life knowing that even if everything changes, even if people leave, even if silence surrounds you, you will be okay. You have yourself, and that is more than enough. 9. Loving yourself means letting go without needing closure. One of the hardest lessons on the journey of self-love is learning how to let go without receiving explanations, apologies, or clear endings. The human mind craves closure. It wants answers. It wants reasons. It wants someone to admit fault, to understand your pain, or to explain why things changed. Buddhism teaches that this craving for closure is another form of attachment, and attachment always keeps suffering alive. When you wait for closure from others, you place your healing in their hands. Loving yourself means taking that power back. Many people remain emotionally stuck, not because the situation is still happening, but because they are still waiting for something that may never come. You replay conversations in your mind. You imagine what you would say if you ever spoke again. You wonder why they acted the way they did, why they could not treat you better, or why you were not enough for them to stay. Buddhism reminds us that the mind creates suffering by clinging to unanswered questions. Not everything in life will make sense, and not every wound will come with an explanation. Letting go without closure does not mean pretending that you were not hurt. It means accepting that some people are not capable of giving you the understanding you deserve. They may lack awareness, emotional maturity, or the courage to face their own actions. Waiting for them to change, apologize, or explain keeps you tied to their limitations. Loving yourself means recognizing that your peace is more important than their clarity. Buddhism teaches impermanence as a core truth. Everything that arises will pass away, including relationships, emotions, and identities. When you truly understand this, you stop demanding permanent answers from temporary situations. You realize that some chapters end without explanations, and that is part of life's natural flow. The ending itself is the closure. The distance is the message. The silence is the answer. Learning to let go without closure requires deep inner strength. It asks you to sit with uncertainty without trying to fix it. It asks you to release the hope that one final conversation will heal everything. Often, that conversation only reopens wounds. Buddhism teaches that healing comes from acceptance, not from repetition. When you stop reopening old pain, you allow it to soften and eventually dissolve. As you practice letting go, you begin to understand that closure is not something others give you. It is something you create within yourself. You create closure by honoring what you felt, acknowledging what you learned, and deciding how you will move forward. You forgive not to excuse what happened, but to free yourself from carrying it. Forgiveness in Buddhism is not forgetting. It is releasing the emotional grip that the past has on your present. Silence becomes important in this process. When you no longer seek closure externally, you stop reaching out, checking, or hoping for signs. You turn inward. You reflect. You allow yourself to grieve what was lost without needing validation for that grief. This quiet acceptance is not resignation, it is wisdom. It allows your heart to close the door gently instead of slamming it in anger or leaving it open in hope. Letting go without closure also deepens your self-respect. You stop chasing people who walked away. You stop asking questions that hurt more than they heal. You understand that if someone wanted to explain, apologize, or make things right, they would have already done so. Loving yourself means accepting reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. This acceptance is not easy, but it is freeing. Over time, you notice that the pain loses its intensity. The questions fade, the emotional charge weakens. You begin to feel lighter, not because you got answers, but because you stopped needing them. Buddhism teaches that freedom comes when desire dissolves, including the desire for closure. When you no longer need the past to explain itself, the present becomes peaceful. In the end, loving yourself means trusting that you do not need every door closed neatly to move forward. Some doors close quietly, some remain unanswered. And some are meant to be walked away from without looking back. When you let go without closure, you choose healing over understanding, peace over explanation, and self-respect over attachment. And in that choice, you finally set yourself free. 10. Self-love is choosing peace every day, even when the mind wants to revisit the past. One of the deepest tests of self-love is not found in dramatic moments, but in the quiet, ordinary days when nothing new happens and the mind begins to wander backward. The past has a powerful pull. It replays memories, conversations, regrets, and what-ifs. It brings back faces, words, and moments that once mattered deeply. Buddhism teaches that the mind, when left untrained, naturally clings to what is familiar, even if what is familiar causes pain. Loving yourself means recognizing this tendency and gently choosing peace again and again, even when the mind wants to reopen old wounds. There will be days when you feel strong and clear, and days when old emotions resurface without warning. A memory may appear suddenly. A song, a place, or a quiet moment may remind you of someone you let go of, or a chapter that ended without answers. In those moments, the mind may try to convince you that revisiting the past will bring relief, understanding, or comfort. Buddhism reminds us that this is an illusion. The past cannot give you peace because it no longer exists. Each time you mentally return to it, you are not healing it, you are reliving it. Self-love is learning to notice when the mind begins to pull you backward and choosing not to follow. This does not mean suppressing your emotions or pretending you do not feel pain. It means acknowledging the feeling without feeding it with stories. You observe the sadness, the longing, or the regret as passing mental states, not as truths that define you. Buddhism teaches mindfulness as the art of watching thoughts rise and fall without attachment. When you practice this, you stop becoming lost inside your own mind. Choosing peace is often a quiet, invisible act. No one sees it. No one praises you for it. It happens internally when you decide not to replay that conversation again, not to imagine a different ending, and not to question your worth based on something that has already passed. This choice may need to be made many times in a single day. Self-love is not a single decision, it is a daily practice. There is also courage in choosing peace, because the mind sometimes prefers pain over uncertainty. Pain feels familiar. Peace feels empty at first. Buddhism teaches that emptiness is not lack, but openness. When you stop filling your inner space with memories, resentment, or longing, there is silence. At first, that silence can feel uncomfortable, but if you stay with it, it becomes calming. It becomes a place where clarity can arise. Loving yourself means trusting this quiet space instead of running back to emotional noise. As you continue choosing peace, you begin to notice subtle changes within yourself. Your reactions soften, your thoughts slow down, you no longer feel pulled into emotional spirals as easily. The past loses its grip, not because you forced it away, but because you stopped giving it energy. Buddhism teaches that whatever you do not feed will eventually fade. Peace grows stronger when it is chosen consistently, even in small moments. Choosing peace also means forgiving yourself for times when you do slip back into old patterns. Self-love is gentle. It does not punish you for feeling human. When the mind wanders, you bring it back without judgment. When old pain resurfaces, you meet it with compassion instead of frustration. Buddhism teaches that suffering increases when we resist our own emotions. Healing happens when we allow them to pass naturally, without attachment. Over time, choosing peace becomes easier. What once required effort becomes instinctive. You no longer feel the urge to revisit people who are no longer in your life or situations that no longer serve you. You understand that growth is not about forgetting the past, but about no longer living inside it. The past becomes a teacher, not a prison. This level of self-love also changes how you experience the present. You become more aware of simple moments. Silence feels supportive instead of empty. Solitude feels grounding instead of lonely. You begin to appreciate your own company, your own rhythm, and your own inner stability. Buddhism teaches that peace is not something you achieve in the future. It is something you allow in the present when you stop clinging to what has already passed. In the end, loving yourself is the commitment to return to peace every time the mind tries to pull you away from it. It is choosing presence over memory, awareness over habit, and compassion over self-criticism. This choice may never be perfect, but it becomes powerful through consistency. Each time you choose peace, you strengthen your relationship with yourself. And when that relationship is strong, silence no longer feels like absence. It feels like home. 11. Loving yourself is returning to yourself again and again without losing your heart. At the deepest level, loving yourself is not about building a perfect life, having unshakable confidence, or never feeling pain again. Buddhism teaches something far more human and compassionate. Loving yourself is the practice of returning to yourself again and again, especially after life pulls you away. You will be disappointed. You will be misunderstood. You will make choices that later feel unclear. You will trust people who cannot hold your heart gently. None of this means you have failed. It means you are alive. Self-love is not the absence of falling apart. It is the willingness to come back to yourself each time you do. There are moments when life overwhelms you quietly, not with dramatic chaos, but with small, constant pressures, expectations, responsibilities, emotional fatigue. You may lose touch with your inner voice. You may start living on autopilot, reacting instead of reflecting, enduring instead of choosing. Buddhism teaches that suffering often begins when we abandon awareness. We drift away from ourselves without realizing it. Loving yourself means noticing this drift without blame and gently guiding yourself back. Returning to yourself requires honesty. It means acknowledging when something no longer feels right, even if it once did. It means admitting when you are tired, even if you are used to being strong. It means allowing yourself to change without needing permission from others. Many people remain stuck because they fear disappointing others more than they fear abandoning themselves. Buddhism reminds us that the greatest betrayal is not losing someone else, but losing awareness of your own heart. As self-love deepens, you begin to listen inwardly before responding outwardly. You pause, you breathe. You ask yourself what feels true, not what looks acceptable. This inner listening becomes your compass. When something disturbs your peace repeatedly, you no longer ignore it. When a relationship drains you, you stop rationalizing it. When a path no longer aligns with your values, you allow yourself to step away without dramatic explanations. Returning to yourself often happens quietly, through small, consistent choices that honor your inner truth. This return is not selfish, it is necessary. Buddhism teaches that when you are disconnected from yourself, you cannot genuinely offer compassion to others. You may give, but it will come from exhaustion. You may love, but it will be mixed with resentment. When you return to yourself, your actions become cleaner, your kindness becomes lighter, your presence becomes grounded. You no longer give to be needed, you give because you are whole. Loving yourself also means forgiving yourself for the times you stayed too long, trusted too deeply, or ignored your intuition. The mind often revisits these moments with harsh judgment. Buddhism teaches that clinging to self-blame is another form of suffering. You did the best you could with the awareness you had at the time. Growth does not come from punishment. It comes from understanding. When you forgive yourself, you free energy that was trapped in regret and redirect it toward healing. Returning to yourself is a lifelong process. There is no final arrival. Some days you will feel centered and calm. Other days you will feel scattered and uncertain. Self-love does not demand perfection. It invites patience. When you feel lost, you do not shame yourself. You pause. You slow down. You reconnect with your breath, your body, your values. Buddhism teaches that awareness itself is healing. The moment you notice you have wandered, you have already returned. At this stage, silence takes on a deeper meaning. It is no longer just the absence of conflict or noise. It becomes a space where you meet yourself honestly. In silence, you hear your needs clearly. You sense when something is misaligned. You feel when it is time to rest, to let go, or to begin again. This silence is not empty. It is full of presence. It allows you to stay connected to yourself, even when the world feels demanding. Loving yourself also means allowing life to unfold without constant resistance. You stop trying to control every outcome. You stop forcing people to stay or situations to work. Buddhism teaches acceptance not as resignation, but as trust in the flow of life. When something ends, you let it end. When something begins, you welcome it gently. You understand that life moves through seasons, and so do you. Returning to yourself means flowing with these changes instead of fighting them. Over time, you begin to feel an inner steadiness that does not depend on circumstances. Your sense of self becomes less reactive and more rooted. You still feel emotions, but they pass through you without defining you. You still care, but you no longer abandon yourself in the process. This is the quiet strength Buddhism speaks of. A strength that does not dominate, but endures. In the end, loving yourself is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you are beneath conditioning, expectations, and past wounds. It is about coming home to yourself repeatedly with patience and compassion. When you do this, walking away in silence no longer feels like loss. It feels like alignment. Silence becomes a place of return. And self-love becomes the gentle, steady presence that carries you through every chapter of your life. 12. Loving yourself is living gently with yourself for the rest of your life. At the deepest and most enduring level, loving yourself is not a moment of awakening or a dramatic shift that happens once and stays forever. It is a lifelong relationship you build with yourself, one quiet choice at a time. Buddhism teaches that life is not meant to be conquered or controlled, but understood and lived with awareness. In the same way, self-love is not about fixing yourself or becoming someone else. It is about learning how to live gently with who you are, especially during moments when you feel imperfect, uncertain, or emotionally tired. For many people, the inner voice is harsh. It criticizes mistakes, compares endlessly, and replays past failures as proof of unworthiness. You may speak to yourself in ways you would never speak to someone you love. Buddhism teaches that this inner violence creates suffering just as real as external harm. Loving yourself means becoming aware of this inner dialogue and slowly transforming it. You begin to notice when you are pushing yourself too hard, judging yourself too harshly, or demanding constant strength from a heart that needs rest. Gentleness becomes a form of wisdom. Living gently with yourself means allowing emotions without rushing to escape them. When sadness arises, you no longer shame yourself for feeling weak. When fear appears, you do not force bravery before understanding what the fear is trying to protect. Buddhism teaches mindful presence with emotions, not resistance. You sit with what you feel, you breathe. You allow the emotion to move through you without building stories around it. This gentle attention softens pain instead of deepening it. Self-love also means respecting your limits. There will be days when you have less energy, less clarity, and less patience. In the past, you may have pushed through these days, ignoring your needs in order to meet expectations or prove your worth. Buddhism reminds us that the body and mind are not machines, they move in rhythms. Loving yourself means honoring those rhythms instead of fighting them. Rest becomes sacred. Slowing down becomes necessary. Saying no becomes an act of balance, not selfishness. As you live gently with yourself, you stop measuring your life by constant productivity or emotional perfection. You understand that growth is not linear. Some days feel open and light, others feel heavy and unclear. Both are part of the path. Buddhism teaches that clinging to constant happiness creates suffering because happiness, like all things, is impermanent. Loving yourself means allowing life to include joy, pain, confusion, and peace without rejecting any of it. Gentle self-love also changes how you respond to mistakes. Instead of punishing yourself, you reflect. You ask what the experience taught you. You accept responsibility without drowning in guilt. Buddhism teaches that awareness transforms behavior more effectively than self-hatred ever could. When you meet mistakes with curiosity instead of judgment, you grow without losing your heart in the process. Living gently with yourself also affects how you move through relationships. You no longer tolerate emotional harm in the name of love, but you also no longer harden yourself to avoid pain. You learn to hold boundaries with kindness and distance with compassion. When something ends, you grieve without self-blame. When someone disappoints you, you process the pain without abandoning your values. Buddhism teaches the middle path, not extremes. You neither cling nor reject. You respond with balance. As the years pass, this gentle way of living creates deep inner stability. You stop fighting yourself. You stop demanding constant certainty. You become comfortable with not having all the answers. Silence becomes a companion, not a threat. Solitude becomes a place of restoration, not emptiness. You trust yourself enough to walk through life without rushing, without forcing, and without constantly questioning your worth. Loving yourself for life also means accepting aging, change, and impermanence. You stop chasing versions of yourself that no longer exist. You honor who you are becoming instead of clinging to who you were. Buddhism teaches that everything is in motion, including identity. When you accept this, you stop fearing change. You move with it gently, allowing each phase of life to shape you without breaking you. In this final understanding, self-love becomes simple. It is how you speak to yourself in quiet moments. It is how you treat yourself when no one is watching. It is how you forgive yourself when you fall short and how you rest when you are tired. You no longer seek dramatic healing or perfect peace. You seek presence. You seek honesty. You seek a kind relationship with yourself that can last through every season. In the end, loving yourself is not about becoming untouchable. It is about becoming real, grounded, and kind with yourself in a world that is constantly changing. When you live gently with yourself, walking away in silence no longer feels like loss or defense. It feels natural. It feels aligned. And self-love becomes what it was always meant to be, not an achievement, but a way of living that carries you quietly, steadily, and compassionately through your entire life. Loving yourself is not a loud declaration or a dramatic transformation that happens overnight. It is a quiet, ongoing commitment to your inner well-being. It is choosing peace when the world invites you to react, choosing awareness when the mind wants to cling, and choosing silence when words would only deepen your wounds. Buddhism teaches that suffering lessens not when life becomes perfect, but when the heart becomes wise. Through self-love, you learn how to walk through life without abandoning yourself. When you stop begging for understanding, stop chasing validation, stop holding on to people who harm your peace, and stop reopening doors that were meant to close, something powerful happens inside you. You return to yourself. You begin to live from a place of calm clarity instead of emotional hunger. Walking away in silence no longer feels like loss. It feels like alignment. It feels like respect for your own heart. This path does not make you cold or distant. It makes you grounded. You still care, but you no longer cling. You still love, but you no longer bleed. You still speak, but only when words are meaningful. Silence becomes your protection, your boundary, and your strength. Not because you are afraid to speak, but because you have learned that peace is more valuable than being heard by the wrong people. In the end, loving yourself means understanding that no one else can do this work for you. No relationship, no apology, no explanation can replace self-respect. When you choose yourself quietly, consistently, and compassionately, life begins to feel lighter. You move forward without resentment, without regret, and without the need to prove anything. You walk your path with dignity, awareness, and calm. Remember this gently and clearly. Love yourself fully, honor your peace, and walk away in silence when needed. The quiet path is often the strongest one, and it always leads you back to yourself.